Okay, guys, today I want to discuss the importance of autism awareness, specifically understanding and embracing differences. So, although 1 in 88 people are diagnosed with autism, um, people still have misconceptions about what autism really is. Autism is defined as a severe disorder of development characterized by abnormalities in communication, social relationships, and patterns of behavior. So I want to talk a little bit about the histories and characteristics of autism. So it was first diagnosed as a distinct psychiatric disorder by the psychiatrist Leo Kanner in 1943. He diagnosed kids with autism who show patterns of struggling to relate to others, speaking in a peculiar way, and having an aversion to change or spontaneous activities. We first see signs of autism in infancy. So when babies are unresponsive to their parents coming, going, or their parents' emotions. Also, as kids grow, we see lack of sensitivity to others' emotions. So when when their classmates might be happy or sad, they don't respond well to that. A version of eye gaze. So people with autism often don't want to make direct eye contact, and then inappropriate facial expressions. So not responding like in the way that might be seen as normal. Also, delayed speech is common, whether that be people with autism don't start speaking for the first few years of their life or have different forms of communication. There are also many misconceptions about autism spectrum disorder. People believe that individuals with ASD are rude, unintelligent, cannot feel emotion, and do not desire relationships. Studies actually show that people with autism desire relationships just as much as neurotypical people. They just can't express that as well. So, the impact of autism awareness in peer interactions. Autism awareness leads to early intervention. So, research shows that early intervention can improve children's holistic development, decrease challenging behaviors, assist them in gaining essential social and communication skills, thus leading to positive outcomes later in life. So, early intervention is just like therapy or education starting from a young age for kids with autism to help them prosper and grow and learn well. It's beneficial for parents to know and teachers to know symptoms of autism so that they're able to recognize that in their kids or their students to help get them that early intervention. And autism awareness also lowers stigmas and misconceptions. So I discussed a couple of the misconceptions already, but societal structures can disadvantage autistic individuals through negative attitudes, systemic barriers, and a lack of accommodations. So oftentimes, neurotypical peers will find people with autism to be like different or weird, or their actions might be seen as odd. So they'll try to refrain from having interactions with kids, which will lead to less autistic kids having less meaningful relationships and not being able to connect with others and have proper social skills that they need to grow in life. Societal expectations. So there's a lot of expectations for parents and teachers in society. And so one of the main problems with this is ignorant judgment. So what may be a sensory meltdown for a child with autism spectrum disorder can be seen by others as a parent not doing their job. So these behaviors, such as like meltdowns, like I talked about here, are like uncontrollable, and many people might not recognize that or might not know that those things are something that the parents can't really control. It's just when the child is overstimulated and not responding well to the environment. So this judgment can be passed on by like rude remarks or rude looks. Could have a negative impact on both the child and the parents. A lack of accommodations. So lack of accommodation alienates autistic children and their parents. So when people are kind of refraining from doing things with autistic children, again, like leaving them alone and like not wanting to be friends with them, but also in spaces that, like social settings, that are not accommodating well, such as like environments with a lot of stimuli. So, some examples that would be beneficial to help accommodate people with autism is like sensory rooms at baseball games or sensory friendly movie showings. So that way, autistic kids and their family can still go out and do these things, but not be overwhelmed. Limited social opportunities. This kind of coincides with the lack of accommodations, not being invited to social events because they're seen as different. When people become aware of what they can do to help parents in situations instead of passing judgment, it fosters growth of the autistic child and their family. I also want to discuss successful people with autism because one of the major misconceptions is that you can't be successful if you have autism, but that's not true. So Elon Musk was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of high functioning autism. And he's openly discussed how that's actually been kind of beneficial, like advantageous in his pursuit for success. So he would spend many hours alone working on computers and like coding things, which might not be seen as normal to most people, but is actually a pretty typical behavior for someone with autism. Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla, although they were never formally diagnosed, they show many symptoms of having autism. So Albert Einstein, both of them actually, they kind of liked to be isolated more and didn't have as many social interactions with other people. And Albert Einstein, he had delayed speech, so he didn't start talking until he was 3. And Nikola Tesla had like rigid routines, so every night he wouldn't eat dinner till like 8-10 p.m. And then he would pop his toes like 100 times every night. But all these people are very successful, and they have been really beneficial to society, even though people kind of look down on that as like their autism would be a hindrance to that, but that hasn't been clearly. People with autism learn, develop, and interact differently, but that does not mean their intelligence and capabilities are lacking. The biblical need for diversity. So Romans 12:4-6 says, "For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us." So we're all part of like a body of Christ, and we're all made differently and in a unique way by God, and we have different talents and capabilities. So that should be exemplified through like our love for each other and also in our actions. While autistic people see and do things differently, this can bring a much needed alternative perspective to the world. The biblical command to love. So throughout the Bible, there's a lot of talk about loving others, and Jesus actually says this is the greatest commandment. Matthew 22:37-39 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your minds. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself." 1 Peter 4:8-10 says, "Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." So God has given us these talents to love others, these abilities to love others. And we're supposed to, as Christians, we're supposed to reflect Christ in everything that we do. And Jesus is always showing love to marginalized groups or people that might be seen as less than. And so, like Christ, we should be doing that to people in need and people that are desiring relationships but might struggle to make them. Awareness versus action. How can we not only know about autism but take steps to make things better? So awareness is the first step that should be taken to kind of improve the situation, but we should also be taking practical action and doing things to improve it. So first, educate yourself. Learn about typical behaviors and the best ways to approach and discuss autism spectrum disorder. So learning typical behaviors, symptoms of autism, to not only recognize that in your peers, but also in your children, maybe in the future. And then also the part about discussing autism, sometimes people will use like wrong terms or kind of say things that they shouldn't that offends people with autism and kind of puts a negative perception on it. So being careful with how we speak about it. Also, another thing that we can do is promote inclusion and acceptance. So refrain from negatively speaking about autism and instead embrace people with autism. So when you see others, like a shy kid sitting by himself or a girl who's not responding properly to what you say, don't see that, or maybe not see that as them being rude, but it could be just be a symptom of autism. So invite peers and those who are lonely or struggling to be friends and to accept them despite possible differences. Support organizations. So help by volunteering, fundraising, or raising awareness of autism. Over Sabre Week, I got to volunteer at Project Hope, which is an organization that has programs for people with autism of all ages, and they kind of help with therapy, education, social events. And so I was able to work with those kids and kind of see different types of autism, like severities. So kids with low functioning autism that couldn't really communicate like by talking, and so they had different forms of communication. And then kids who were like very hyper and excited to do all things. So it's kind of unique to be able to see that and to become more aware of different types of autism. And then also, I spoke with my brother who has autism and Bailey about some things that they, like advice they would give people that would best help them kind of in life. So letting people know about schedules changes ahead of time. So a lot of times like spontaneous like changes and things like that can bring stress to people with autism. I mean, a lot of people too, but specifically in that case because it's just like something different and abnormal for them. So allowing, if it's possible, to allow them to know about schedule changes ahead of time. Raising autism awareness and acceptance by educating others. So we should not only educate ourselves, but also seek to help others understand what autism is and really everything about it. Doing something for Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. this kind of goes with the second one too. It's actually Autism Awareness Month right now. April is, so kind of talk about autism more, and the school could even like make posters or bring awareness to the fact that it is Autism Awareness Month, and that it should be talked about more. Taking time to understand and accommodate people with autism. So a lot of times when people act differently, um, or kind of don't speak in the same way, others will ignore them, like I talked about earlier. So it's important that we try to understand and seek out those people who might be seen as different, and try to understand their situation. I talked to a developmental pediatrician about kind of her advice and things that she's seen that's actually improved over time and more steps that should be taken. So earlier identification and treatment has grown. Many online support groups, whether this be for parents or a psychologist to help them kind of grow in their knowledge, and then greater access to information. So more studies are being done about what autism really is and therapies and things that can help them. Practical steps to take. Teach kids to accept and include others. So this is kind of like the helping others understand. But if we start from an early age and teach young kids to include others, it'll help them as they get older, and lower the stigmas. Investing in early intervention, and then also continued research and education for parents. Okay, my inspiration. So as some of you might know, my brother has autism. So I want to talk a little bit about why I decided to do this. I'm going to read what I've written just to make it a little easier. Growing up, I was not fully aware of what autism was. I recognized when some of my classmates seemed different or struggled with social interactions, but I did not know what they were going through. This was until my brother was diagnosed with autism. When I was 11, my 12-year-old brother was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He had just started middle school, and it was evident that he was different. He did not have many friends and was often bullied for the way he acted. Despite how intelligent he was, his grades began to drop. After sixth grade, he began online school where he was able to learn at his own pace with minimal disruptions. As I got older, I began to educate myself on what autism was and the struggles my brother faced. I discovered that even though he interacted and learned in a way that is seen as abnormal, he is no way less of a person. However, this view is not how everyone saw him. Many people bullied and ridiculed him for his differences, making it more challenging for him to engage with others and make friends. My brother decided he was ready to come back to in-person school full-time his junior year. He joined the baseball team where he found community and was able to fulfill his passions. When researching the importance of autism awareness, I felt it was essential to ask him about his experience and perspective on the topic. He expressed that a challenge he often faces is not being able to pick up on social cues. When other people are being indirect or implying something through verbiage or body language, it's hard for him to recognize. People with autism struggle greatly with recognizing nonverbal cues or subtle signals. My brother also said he has to have a filter when talking because he does not always know what is appropriate to say in certain situations. He said that it's helpful when people take time to try to understand him and also recognize that him functioning optimally does not look the same as everyone else. Although my brother acts and communicates quite differently from most people, he is still a caring and ambitious person who is living out his life. God gave God has given me a unique opportunity to better understand and grow my communication with others through having a sibling with autism. If people sought to learn more about autism spectrum disorder and how symptoms are displayed by individuals, situations like the one my brother went through may become less common. And then I want to end on this quote by Albert Einstein that says, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." Thank you guys for listening to me today and coming to our presentation.
So like I said, I want to open it up to our guests first. If you got any questions or comments for Ella, go for it.
Yes.
I have noticed that individuals that are slow in learning hard. Is that a symptom or something that
Oftentimes, yes. Not always, but that is a major symptom of autism when a child has delayed speech, because they have less desire for those social interactions and less social skills. So oftentimes that is a symptom, and that's something that psychologists and pediatricians recognize in kids with autism to kind of um, like point that out and be aware that that child might have autism. It won't always be the case, like 100% of the time, but most likely, yes.
Got a couple things just to, one, I really liked and it wasn't really the focus of the project, but I was really interested in mention from the parents' perspective. that a lot of times, like out in public, there is that like judgmental eye towards, man, I really wish they could easy because there might be something else going on. Not a question. I just think that's a really valid point.
Mhm.
Here is a question. Like, when you mentioned how important it is about just having these people in your life. I mean, I like that there's this. I think this is a diversity issue. We talk about diversity. We talk a lot about diversity at Southside, and that's great. But like also diversity includes neurodiversity, right? And so like I love that angle at it. So as for people who are trying to medic and try to relate to people, y'all are going to college. Like a lot of y'all are going to college next year. No doubt there's going to be all kinds of folks. Here's my question: is like so many of the I guess I can call them symptoms. So many of the characteristics of someone with autism is a lot of times they're perceived as antisocial. You mentioned like sitting by yourself, not wanting to be around a lot of like overstimulated,
Yeah.
all that stuff. So what's the advice? You walk into the dining hall, you walk onto the yard or whatever out there, and you see someone sitting by themselves. You want to relate to them, you want to talk to them. Maybe even in class, you see them on a regular basis. What's the approach? Because again, a lot of the lack of social cues, a lot of times, if we're not careful, we interpret that as, oh, this person. So what's the advice? Like upon meeting someone for the first time, and what's the advice for relating to that person?
Yeah. So that can always be hard because people are very different, and so there might be things that like would be good to do for certain people and not for others. But kind of first of all, educating yourself, like we talked about, like understanding what is best, and then also like taking time to kind of like on that first meeting, like talking and really trying to get to know that person. Um, but I don't know, it's definitely challenging. Also, if you don't know if they have autism or they're just like don't want to be social, so it's kind of hard to really decide on that. But just kind of approaching it with love and trying to be there for that person.
So on that note, do you feel like another point you made that I like how you mentioned early awareness or early in school class and so on. It seems like my guess would be, and guess would be having interactions and relationships with autism early on kind of gives you like maybe you can't point to specific things to look out for, but it gives you this like almost good type sense that yeah,
Yeah, I think like also just like teaching kids like that inclusion and stuff early on. So just including all their friends and all things like all types of people despite differences kind of helps with that. And so that way people with autism are less like alienated and separated. And it's more of just like them living with others, but just maybe acting and approaching
right.
things differently.
Yeah, just like as a parent, like with my kids, it's tough to try to explain this person doesn't interact the way we do. It's hard to explain that to my kids, but also it's been wonderful because they have yeah, both my kids have friends who are autistic, and so it's almost like a placeholder. Forgive me if it sounds lazy, but it's like a placeholder where it's like, oh yeah, well they're like David, like they're like these kids that oh okay, and then it almost like immediately clicks for my kids like oh we're good, we're friends then. Like if that's the case, then awesome. And so like yeah, I really appreciated that really. I'll shut up for a second. Anybody else have anything?
What kind of school accommodation best fit the I know my son has
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia. They have more time go to a special room or go to a room with the darker lights, and what kind of accommodation will best fit for kids with autism in terms of academic?
Yeah, I think they're very similar. So here it's kind of the same, I think, for both. Bailey can correct me if I'm wrong, but just like that extended time and kind of allowing them to test in the environment that best works for them. So if kids feel more comfortable with others around them and not being isolated, then like allowing them to do that or to learn that way. But then also going to rooms like how we have our student success services and being able to have those like dark and light. So it's I think it's kind of similar in that sense. There might be other accommodations, and also for the severity of autism, like low functioning autism, like they might have people with them or working with them through taking the test, whereas high functioning, they might just like be given extended time. So I think it's very dependent on the person and the severity of their autism, but similar to how your son has the ADHD, like accommodations.
One of one of the challenges how would you some of this is just proactive. Being a parent. What do you
Yeah, that's hard to say. I feel like I can't answer that with like certainty, but kind of like the encouragement is that we're all like made in the image of God, and so it's not that like your child is bad or like something about them is wrong, but it's just that God made them in a different way. So that could be an encouragement to Christian parents as they're kind of navigating that. But then also like talking with your pediatrician, like your child's pediatrician and things like that really help to like improve that and kind of give you confidence. So if the child does have autism, the pediatrician can kind of help you work through that and recommend like practical ways that will benefit them as a whole in their growth in future. So I think just kind of like a discussion and not keeping it hidden would be my advice.
whether to go.
Yeah, so this, I definitely have a unique opportunity, like being able to research this and also having a brother with autism. So it is kind of like a unique perspective. But I don't know, I feel like as I go through school and I educate myself more on like in depth education, I'll be able to kind of decide what I really want to do. But I definitely think pediatrics is something I'm passionate about. And being a general pediatrician, I could also work with kids with autism because I know that like my pediatrician sees kids with autism and kids with ADHD and is able to work with them. I mean, less than a psychologist or psychiatrist, but working with them through like their daily lives and making sure that they're functioning well and in school and things like that. So it definitely will have an impact and like might influence me to go into developmental pediatrics, but I don't know for sure yet. We'll see. Time will tell. Thanks. Nothing. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. 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 Oh, I don't know. He like other people with autism has very like specific interests and passions, and so there's things that like he's super passionate about. So one time, was it like a plane or a helicopter that you were like both of them? But one time he was given the opportunity, like he was super invested in planes, and so he'd watch all these like shows, documentaries, and things. And so we had the opportunity to like get on a helicopter, and he was able to take controls of it. And so being able to see him like do those fun things and kind of indulge in his interest and like cars and things like that. So he's very interested in cars. And so it's helpful when something breaks on my car and I'm like, Steven, fix it. So that's helpful. So he shows me how to like do it. And I'm not stranded or anytime that my car breaks down, I know I can call him. So just things like that and seeing like his special interests and passions is kind of fun to be able to like live through that through him. So yeah.
Classmates or anything? I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I love it. Focus
Mhm.
and When Stephen was 2 years old, would walk, I would point out cars to him. No, it wasn't Toyota. You remember that? And we went on a vacation to Savannah. We're walking down River Street. He was naming he and I were, the rest of the family was ahead of us. He and I like this couple walking behind us were listening. And the man, how does he know all those cars and everything, even the diesel? Well, he's just smart. And then, like you said, airplanes. Basically, airplanes. All the airplanes.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely pretty common, like to have those special interests. And like the people I talked about, like Elon Musk and Albert Einstein, like they had those interests in science and inventions and creativity. So I think it's really helpful to like have people who are that invested and that good at one thing. Really improve society, and he can help fix cars. He knows how planes work. He can recognize things like that. So that's really cool. Yeah. Emma. Yeah. So I think like kind of how we talked about like in kind of how I talked about integrating like people in and having those social interactions. I think it's really beneficial to be able to kind of be a part of society because one day like they won't be able to just be separate or do stuff on their own or do stuff in isolation. So it's important that they have those social skills. And so being a part of a classroom, like maybe some classes are alone and kind of just a few people in there, but then also having those opportunities to be a part of like normal society and normal classrooms. So they're able to recognize like patterns and things like that if they're able. So I think it's helpful that so that way they don't get like stuck kind of in like a specific way of life and aren't improving or growing on their knowledge of like social societal things, like social norms. So, Bailey, did you have something? Yeah. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. So people that like would need more help in specific areas. Yes. Thanks for pointing that out. Sam?
And like things that happen, but what can you do at a middle school level? So, like if you have to bring awareness to this classroom.
Yeah. I think just kind of including all people. So instead of like how I talked about having a negative perception about people with autism, instead of like excluding it because of the differences, trying to include everybody. And again, just being aware of those things of characteristics that are common in autism, but just like loving others and being there for your classmates who might be shy or might not like be as outgoing as others because it could just be a sign of autism and that they don't have those like other social skills as most people do, but just kind of inclusion I think is really important.
I was thinking along those same lines, like as a teacher, you got a whole group of people in front of you that in high school, not so much, but middle school, like you were saying, teachers were taught to get everybody's attention, to get everybody involved, group projects, everybody's moving around the room, like all that great stuff, right? And again, because the tendency for autism are going to be kind of you're clear of that. I don't know. Sometimes you'll find them right in the middle of all of it, right? But their tendency to steer clear away from that is like it's super helpful to have students who are aware because where the teacher is looking at the whole group of people, having a student, being able to look over his shoulder and I don't know, like salsa. I've always been. Like, let me brag on y'all a little bit. Like Southside has always impressed me, like the student body, not the institution. Students, y'all have always impressed me in the sense that like we have autistic students in our student body, and they're like the most famous people in our school. Like you can't, like my son's grade, everybody knows who David is, right? Y'all's class, everybody knows who Alexis is, and it's like it's just one of those things that I feel like y'all have done a fairly decent job of this, and it's super helpful because as a teacher, I got a whole group of people to think about, right? But Samantha, you hit something like as an individual, whatever the person up front's doing, you can take responsibility by looking over your shoulder, making sure everybody side by side is
Mhm.
for everybody.
They're like it's better for it or survive school or society. For that to be that or to what they're gonna do and say you have this.
Yeah, that's hard to say. And it might just be dependent on the person, the child. I know that my brother, like, a lot of people didn't know that he had autism just because he, like, needed less, like, help and attention and, like, kind of functioned pretty normally. So he wasn't really, like, telling people that he had autism. Like, if somebody asked you, he wasn't concealing it. But, it was something that, like, I feel like it wasn't as much of, like, as a label for him, I guess. And I think that kind of helps him because sometimes people will have that like notion of like, oh, he has autism, so he kind of is like weird or different. But then also people might not be aware if they don't know he has autism, they might be like, why is he acting weird? Like these things are kind of like odd, but are actually just normal for autism. So I don't know. For Steven's case, I feel like I don't know. What do you think? Did you like it or not? Sure.
And like,
It's
and like
good.
they'll say like what I'm good at and I'm successful at, and like autism. So like I have it, how they others in the future with it.
I kind of didn't think about that perspective, but yeah, like if they can see that you are successful with having autism, it might like kind of change their perspective. So I don't know. I feel like it's pretty dependent on the person, like, but I think it's good for like others to know.
Grades for the other students in the room. Would you rather know or not know?
You'd rather know. Sure.
Well, and as you were talking, it's like I'm thinking. Well, it depends on which student we're like the person with autism. Depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like yeah, with Steven, it's like oh okay, cool. Like and then we move forward, right? With other students, it might be so. In other words, it's not just dependent case by case on the person with autism. It's also kind of case by case. Dependent. There may be some people you don't want finding out, right? Just because, like what Steven's saying, like that may change how they end up treating that person, not necessarily for the better. Which all I'm saying is just because this is the value of this presentation, right? Is that like the word awareness, I think gets thrown out a lot with stuff like we want to be aware of this, we want to be aware of that. It gets kind of overplayed sometimes. This is the value of an awareness presentation where it's like, hey, no matter who you are and no matter who you're dealing with, there are certain objective reality, like there are certain constants. You just ought not do, and that you just ought to do. You know, there are certain ways that you ought to treat people with dignity, no matter what the situation is. Right? So I don't know, like that's one of those questions I think could be an ongoing conversation. I never want to like Mrs. Evans even said, like, let's say like label. You know, it's not like you want to put a T-shirt on, walk around, and say I'm autistic. Like that's probably not the move. But also, like, there's a lot to be said about, you know, the little puzzle piece ribbon thing, and like there's a lot to be said about that. So yeah, I think it's something we all need to like grapple with.
I sort of like it's sort of related and unrelated. I just said that I was driving and he was all complaining about. Literally told him, "Can you please stop talking?" And then he was like, "Mom, you know I have ADHD, right? It's hard for ADHD kids." And that like the mom guilt just like it was just very guilty. I guess kind of like if someone have hard time relating to a social function, and like you said as a teacher, why don't you go work in a group? I mean, I'm going to give you a bad grade because you don't work with a group. Well, I have ADHD. Right, I have autism. I mean, you don't necessarily have to say it. It's just like, I really have a hard time. Yeah.
And in my like on that note, in my experience as a teacher, the kids who are I want to be fair and I want to be charitable when I say this. The kids who usually need the most help or need the most assistance are a lot of times the one least likely to say anything. Like I don't know, talk about the stigma that Steven mentioned. Like a lot of times there's this, oh, well, it's your excuse, you know, you're just throwing it on your ADHD or your autism or whatever. You don't really need all this. In my experience, the kids who probably need the most help are the ones that are the most hesitant to basically like they just want to kind of like they don't want to draw any more attention to it than already is there, right? And so it's one of those problems I feel like it kind of takes care of itself, where the more loose you are with throwing this again label out there as like some excuse or whatever. But the people who need it the most are probably not going to be the ones.
A lot of people think that autism is a disease. And so when you think of it as a disease process, this kid, that's so wrong because that's where the label. If we look at it as just a different thing, then we can allow the students to develop those skills that they lack to fit into society better, but not passes on somebody who can't see. It doesn't change who they are. They just social skills, the therapy, the interactions. The awareness part that you're bringing is it's not death sentence. It's not slowly integrating that.
And then like I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying when Stephen was a child, very little, he would refuse to go up into the playground with him. He would sit there and he would watch all the other kids. Ella came around. He was like 100% all in. She would run into there. She would climb all the way up to the top, and then Stephen would engage him, follow, and he was good with following her, but he was not. So just those little subtle things that another person can do to help. Andrew Brown, I don't know if you know. He was too afraid to run in the gym class at that point, and Andrew was half his size, but he was okay. So it was just so cool, and again, a testament to the students how they would partner together more than he could alone. Partnered with him.
I want to highlight like what you said is like super important in terms of perception that a disease to be healed. That's why we use like what Bailey brought up in terms of the terminology that we use. That's why like we're not looking for a cure, we're looking for accommodation. Or what's the terminology? Support needs, and for those of us that this isn't really a part of our lives 24/7, we may look like I'm like y'all listen up, like those of us that don't have this as a part of our 24/7 life, y'all need to understand like those are really significant differences. Like for us, it may seem like, oh, you're splitting hairs, great. Now I got a new set of words that I got to learn and all that stuff. But in terms of perception, yeah, that makes all the difference in the world when you're talking to a kid about, you know, that's why I'm hesitant with like words like symptoms, right? Because symptoms are usually associated with diseases, and that's not the message I'm trying to send across. Or you know, prescriptions or whatever. Like, no. We're talking in a very different thing. Therefore, it should. I think we need to be like as Christians, we can be really obnoxious and be like, well, you're just trying to dictate how I talk, or we love our neighbor as ourselves, and we start to use terminology and language that life a good bit easier. I think as followers of Jesus, we should be willing. Last call. Anything else for? I think that was getting tired of me.
Yes.
Let's go question. You got a slide where you
Which one? Let's see. Is it this one? Further back. This one? Yeah. You can look at that. Yeah. These are just what Bailey and Steven said would be some good. Anything else?
Great job, Bill.
Thank you.